As we go through the sixth chapter, we're going to focus on questions of agency. But as we do that, we're going to circle backwards and forwards with questions as to the capacity of the woman. It's going to almost always going to be a woman, the capacity of the woman to appoint an agent. And of course, a minor cannot appoint an agent. And someone who's between 12 and 12 and a half years old and a na'ara is in this peculiar in between stage that she's not entirely a minor. So her father doesn't have entire responsibility for her, but she's not, well, she doesn't have full majority anyway. Let's see how let's see how these themes play out. We're going to begin with the agency, and we'll see that the Mishnah sort of moves seamlessly into questions. It moves seamlessly from questions of agency to questions of capacity. From agency to capacity. So a woman who says, receive my get for me. In other words, she appoints an agent to receive her get. Maybe she doesn't want to meet the husband, or maybe she's geographically challenged. Maybe she can't travel to meet the husband. So she appoints an agent. And the Mishnah says she needs two sets of witnesses. She needs two lots of witnesses. Shnai. Sheomru b'faneinu amra. Two to say in our presence she spoke, i.e., two to testify that she appointed the agent. Ushnaim sheomru b'faneinu kibel v'kara. And two to say in our presence he received and he tore the get. Afilu hen rishonim v'hen achronim. Even if the first set are the same as the last set. So in theory, the two sets of witnesses could be the same. Could be the same. They could be the same. Or echad mina rishonim v'echad mina achronim. And then maybe one from the first lot and one for the second lot. Ve'echad mitzaref imahem, and one joined up with them. In other words, one of the witnesses could be common, and then one of them could be new. It works. It works fine. But the bottom line is that she'll need two sets of witnesses. Na'ara mu'urasa. What about a na'ara, a 12 to 12 and a half year old, someone who's in this in-between stage between majority and minority? And she's mu'urasa, she's betrothed. Really, really interesting liminal example, because if she'd been properly married, she would have left the domain of her father and she'd entered the domain of her husband. And then, of course, she could accept a get. But she hasn't yet, she's only betrothed. So she hasn't yet left the domain of her father. And because she hasn't hit 12 and a half, she's not fully of the age of the majority. So this is a classic liminal example, edge case. So let's look at the Mishnah. Na'ara mu'urasa, a 12 to 12 and a half year old girl who's betrothed. He ve'aviha makablin gita. Either she and or her father, or both she and her father can receive the get. So it seems as if we're going to respond to this ambiguity by allowing either the father or the daughter to receive the get. And Rabbi Yudah will disagree. Rabbi Yudah Omer, Ein shtei yadayim zachot kachat. Rabbi Yudah said two hands can't take possession as one. In other words, we don't want any ambiguity here. Eila, avia makabel gita bilvad. Rather, her father alone can receive the get. Rabbi Yudah doesn't want ambiguity here. And then the Mishnah goes on, anyone who's not capable to safeguard her get. So this is someone who's absolutely below the age of majority. She doesn't seem to have if she doesn't have the ability to lishmor, to safeguard her get. She's not, well, she just doesn't seem to have the necessary, probably doesn't have the mental capacity to accept the get. Eina tzricha garesh. She's not capable of being divorced. She's not capable of being divorced. In this case, we're just talking about legal rights here rather than ethical or moral issues. But it seems that the husband will have to wait until she gets a bit older in order to give her a get. If a minor said, go and receive my get for me. This is a mirror example, a mirror image of the statement at the beginning of the second Mishnah. A woman says, receive my get for me. She's the one who requires two sets of witnesses. And now the minor is going to say, Ketana, this is someone below the age of 12. Ketana shamrat, say, hitkabel ligiti. No get ad shiagia get al yada. It's not a get until it actually reaches her hand. In other words, the agency doesn't seem to have any validity here. Because she, well, the Mishnah will explain. Lefichach imratza habal hachzir. So if the husband wanted to retract, in other words, he's given the get to the one who's set up as an agent, but we'll see in a minute he's not really an agent. And then he changes his mind and he sends a message to say, no, I don't want to do this. If the husband wants to draw back, yachzir, he can draw back. She'ein hakatan oseh shaliach. This is a really important principle. A minor cannot appoint an agent. I think Moshe Feinstein brings. Anyway, this is one of the possible reasons why, for example, a minor can't be a Baal Koreh. That the Baal Koreh is the agent of the person being called up, but a minor cannot appoint an agent. I think it's Rav Soloveitchik who makes this statement. A minor can't appoint an agent. The im amar lo aviha, but if the father appointed him, the im amar lo aviha tzeve kabel viti gita. If the father said, go and receive the get for my daughter, imrat salah lo yachzir, he can't retract. So the agent can be validly appointed for the daughter by the father, assuming that she's a katana, she's below the age of 12. So she's completely within the domain of her father. This must apply, by the way, to a girl who's betrothed but not married. If she'd been married, she would be outside the domain of her father. She must be just betrothed because she's still in the domain of her father. She's still in the domain of her father. So her father says to the agent, go and receive the get for my daughter. If the husband wanted to retract, he can't retract. At this point, the agency is valid. Ha'omer, ten get ze, li'ishti bimkom poloni. Someone who said to an agent, give this get to my wife in such and such a place. So the location is a part of the agency. The agent is appointed on the basis that the transaction happens in a certain place. And he actually gave it to her in a different place. Sorry, unetanola b'makom acher. He gave it to her in a different place. Pasul. The whole agency is invalid. We'll see this again, by the way, when we learn the Mishnah of Kiddushin. That if the agency includes a condition that it happens in a certain place and it doesn't happen in that place, it's invalid. Now, if he just makes a general descriptor, hare hi b'makom ploni. Maybe he gives the get to the agent. He says, oh yeah, she's in such and such a place. This is exactly parallel to a discussion in Kiddushin. And we'll see, of course, that the agency for divorce and the agency for Kiddushin are parallel. Hare hi b'makom ploni. She's in such and such a place. It's just a descriptor. He's appointing an agent. He's trying to help the agent by telling the agent where the woman is. Kasher. And he gives it to her in another place, it's valid. So in this case, the agency doesn't seem to depend on the location. If a woman says, receive my get in such and such a place, and he receives it for her in another place, pasul, it's invalid. Exactly mirror image. So the agency that in this case is the wife's agency rather than the husband's agency, but she makes the same condition. Receive my get in such and such a place. It happens somewhere else. It's invalid. Pasul. Rabbi Elazar seems to say that it's okay. He will say it's okay. Bring me my get from a certain place, i.e., the get is in a certain place. Please bring it from there. Veheviola mimakom acher, and he brings it from a different place. Kasher, it is still valid. Again, in this situation, it seems as though the place descriptor is merely a description of the agency rather than a condition of the agency. And in this case, the agency therefore seems to stand.